Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. This is a brief summary of the decision-making process through which the BC Muslim Association decided Eid-Ul-Adha, and the purpose of this is to give a little bit of insight to the brothers and sisters as to how and why the decision comes about, and hopefully this will answer many of the questions that are arising in the minds today, and it will help solve further confusions that may take place in the future. The purpose is not to give a very lengthy lecture, but it's just to give a clarification and an explanation of how things are done. Before we proceed with that, it would make sense to give a little bit of a background as to why we have a certain policy in place and what affects this policy. So here is a little bit of history of what led to the building of this policy. In 2009, which was the beginning of my involvement with various affairs of the BCMA, there was, in the month of Ramadan, a serious controversy and conflict because the BC Muslim Association had, in fact, made a decision based on the Saudi announcements, and a great divide took place. There were some people, in fact, there were many people who did not accept the decision, and there were those who did accept the decision, and it turned into quite a serious matter. After that Ramadan, the BCMA gave me the mandate to form a policy that would help resolve this conflict in the years to come. And the efforts to build this policy began with consulting various scholars around the world. I had at that time made some trips overseas where I consulted with some prominent jurists. Other scholars in the association were also asked to speak to their teachers and senior scholars who were well versed in these matters. I also consulted with certain organizations which were headed by scholars and organizations that were very much involved with the sighting of the moon. And I tried to get as many suggestions as I could to solve the problem. Most of the scholars, however, advised me to make an effort to unite the local scholars, the scholars amongst whom the debate was taking place and the difference was taking place. Scholars that were sort of leading these communities needed to get together and compile a comprehensive set of guidelines that they could all mutually agree on and then stand by them in front of their communities. So a number of meetings took place within the scholars of the BC Muslim Association, and the Sharia Council, which is another body of mosques here in BC, their scholars also were invited and included in the process. And a policy was drafted and proposed, and this policy would neither ignore the importance of actual sighting, which has been stressed in hadith, nor would it ignore the fact that there are many pieces of science that come together and can assist us to get to the bottom of all of these debates. So we don't want to give science a position whereby it's overruling some basic Sharia guidelines, nor do we want to use Sharia as a means of hindering us from using the scientific data that is available to us. This policy was presented to the religious board of the BC Muslim Association. It was presented to the various imams as well as the Sharia Council imams. It went to the executives. It was also presented in front of the BC Muslim Association Council. And after it received approval at all of these levels, it was presented to the general public. The policy did not remain stagnant from 2009 till today. In fact, it did go through some amendments, and those amendments were related to practical aspects of executing the policy. For example, there was a condition of 50% possibility of sighting, which we agreed was something very difficult to narrow down. So we changed that to a possibility of sighting by the human eye. And there were some other aspects of the policy that were modified. The basic foundation of this policy is that we are not going to compromise accepted and agreed upon scholarly interpretations of Quran, Hadith, and fiqh texts. This policy is going to apply equally to both Eids and Ramadan, and this policy is not going to be used to judge any country or organization's decision as right or wrong, but this policy is in fact there to resolve this conflict that keeps taking place between a number of groups. There are those who are adhering to only the scientific calculations. Then there are those who are adhering only to the Saudi announcements. And then there are those who are adhering only to local sighting. The point was to bring all of these groups to a common ground. Another important aspect of the policy is that it is not biased in favor of or against any country. And one of the amendments that was made later on in the policy was that the range of sightings are going to extend to every country around the globe. Whereas initially it was started with about a 12-hour radius from British Columbia, from our time zone. So this includes all Muslim and non-Muslim countries from where we can receive and also verify reports of moon sighting. Some of the important features of this policy are to first take into consideration actual human eye observations. So we're not relying only on scientific calculations or possibilities. But we want to bring in scientific possibility or probability as a means of cross-verifying reported sightings. So on one side there should be sightings. On the other side, the sightings should be backed by sufficient possibility, which are agreed on by two astronomical bodies. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So to summarize, there are three things, three essential ingredients that go into a decision. First of all, actual sightings. Then those sightings are compared against the possibility of sighting or not sighting. And thirdly, the reports of sighting need to be verified. That did the sighting actually take place? Do we know who made the sightings? Are there any reservations about the authenticity of the sighting? And so on and so forth. Once all three things line up, we have grounds to make a decision. So if there is a country or a region where there was a possibility of sighting and a sighting is confirmed from there, this is now sufficient for us to decide that yes, the crescent of the new moon has been sighted, and with that the new month, the new Islamic month or the lunar month now commences. In the event that we have sightings from regions without a well-established possibility, which means that either there is no possibility or the possibility is so slim that it is not sufficient in the opinion of the committee as grounds for a decision, then we wait for reports of another independent sighting in some other region. Now once another region that has some sort of a system or they have people independently making observations, once we have sightings reported from such a region, even if it is another region with very low possibility, but the sighting is verified, now we can say that this second sighting supports the primary sighting which was reported first, and because we have two independent sightings from two different areas, each one not affected by the other, but confirming the other, now these two independent sightings will be used as grounds to overrule the scientific possibility or lack of possibility or lack of probability, and these two sightings will now be the cause of and the grounds of a decision. Now let's move into the decision that was just made a few days ago about the Dhul Hijjah of this year, 1435, on the Hijri calendar, 2014 on the Gregorian calendar. The meeting of our committee was held on Thursday, September 25th, instead of Wednesday, September 24th. And the reason for this was to give us some more time to go through the data, and because the Eid was going to be 10 days after, at least anyways, we were not in a rush to make the announcement. We wanted the members of the committee, we wanted the imams and those that are contributing to these meetings to have ample time to research and understand the situation around the world in respect to these moon sightings. In our meeting, the following facts were presented. Firstly, the possibility of visibility was very restricted. It was restricted to a very small portion of the world. And aside from that, there were no verified reports of sighting except for Saudi Arabia. When these facts came together, what we do is we look at the possibility of sighting in that area. Now, many of you are familiar with these diagrams from moonsighting.com. The website clarifies the time of the astronomical new moon. It states that they do not expect any reports of sighting from South America and the Polynesian Islands, and so on and so forth. So the entire region is completely black, which means there is no possibility of sighting, according to Khalid Shaukat, who is the person making these curves. The only chance of sighting in South America is with optical aid, and a stronger possibility of sighting over here, and then another stronger possibility over here if the conditions are perfect. This is now the Polynesian area that was mentioned. But the graph or the chart, the diagram, it concludes that sighting the crescent in this area, in the Saudi Arabia area, is not possible for September 24th, just like it isn't for the other regions on the map that are black. I mentioned that we try to look through numerous conclusions drawn by various astronomical bodies and organizations. Here's another one, the ICO project. And again, it's quite clear that they are stating that there's no possibility of sighting the moon in this whole area. So you have the red where it says impossible, and then no color, not possible. Let's take a look at another diagram. This is posted by crescentwatch.org, and you can see the diagrams vary slightly. For example, their opinion about this area is slightly different from the first two diagrams. But about this entire region, all three bodies, all three organizations are agreed on the fact that there is no possibility of sighting. Let's go over to another astronomical body. This is the UK Hydrographic Office, and they also post the results of certain possibilities. We have here a clip directly from their website, and they allow you to put it into text as well. So looking at Wednesday, September 24th, it gives you the time for sunset and so on and so forth. And then the range of possibility. Now, we've selected Riyadh because the sightings that were reported in Saudi were in the Riyadh region. That's why in this particular chart and in other charts that I've used in this presentation, we are using Riyadh. So they have a code here for what are the chances of sighting going from A to F, and you have E here where it's not visible with a telescope. D, we'll need optical aid to find the crescent moon. And then you have F, it's not visible because it's below the Danjon limit, and that is what they have posted for Wednesday, September 24th, that there is no possibility of sighting. So these are not just Muslim scientists that are coming up with these conclusions. These conclusions are pretty much agreed upon around the globe. When we talk about designating the regions or discovering the regions where sightings are possible or not possible, there's quite a bit of science and there's substantial scientific literature on it. For those of you who are interested, you can go and research it. You can go onto the websites of these astronomical bodies and see when these systems were developed, how they were developed, what kind of math goes into it, what scientific considerations take place. And you see here the results of Mr. Yallop's calculations, which are broadly used around the world by many astronomers. So he says that if there is a place where the moon could have been sighted, it's the eastern South Pacific Ocean. That concurs with these other maps that we looked at. And as I mentioned, there's sufficient literature on this to explain to us how these areas and regions are designated and the science and math that goes behind it. Another issue, aside from the possibility of sighting in certain regions, another issue that we cannot ignore when talking about possibility is once the moon is born, how long does it take for us to be able to see it? So I've copied here a question from the moonsighting.com website, and if you take a look here, somebody's asking that is it really possible, or is there grounds for the assertment that the moon cannot be sighted prior to 13 hours after moon birth? Another important issue taken into consideration is how soon after moon birth can the moon be seen? We have in front of us a question and answer posted on moonsighting.com. The question asks, what is the scientific basis for the apparently accepted view that the moon cannot be sighted with the naked eye if it is younger than 13 hours or so? The answer is that the published record for moon sighting with bare eyes shows that no one has ever seen the crescent of less than 15.4 hours old. He goes on to say that this sighting was done on September 14th, 1871, and later on states that this was in the previous century when atmospheric pollution and city light pollution did not exist. Now it is not possible to see even this kind of crescent. In recent times, the crescent that has been seen with naked eye had the angle of 10.5 degrees, which corresponds to 17 to 21 hours of age. Remember, even 17 to 21 hours age does not mean that every moon of this age will be visible. There are other factors that must meet the certain minimum for a crescent to be visible. So even though the scientists have not designated a minimum of time that must pass between birth and sighting, these figures give us sort of a loose idea of what type of time range we're looking at. Let's take a look at what was going on at that time and in that region where the moon was sighted. The same website, moonsighting.com, informs us that the astronomical new moon is on Wednesday, September 24th, 2014 at 6:14 Universal Time. 6:14 Universal Time corresponds to 9:14 a.m. in Riyadh. Based on this, let's take a look at what time the moon set was. Timeanddate.com tells us that moon set on that day in Riyadh was at 5:51 p.m. When we look at those figures, it tells us that the total amount of time that elapsed from the astronomical new moon to the moon set in Riyadh, the area where the moon sighting was reported, is 8 hours and 37 minutes. So that gives us some insight as to how old the moon was, and that, of course, helps us understand a little bit more about the possibilities of sighting. Another important aspect that we look at is the time difference between sunset and moonset. In other words, how much time did we have to observe the moon in the case that it was actually visible? So according to Islamic Finder, Maghrib was on at 5:48 on that day, and this is confirmed by the official Twitter account that broadcasts the Salat timings for Riyadh. And bear in mind that the crescent can only be sighted after sunset. So if sunset is 5:48, what time was the moon set? The moon set, like we already mentioned, was 5:51. So based on timeanddate.com, the sunset being 5:48, the moon set being 5:51, there was a total of 3 minutes. And based on the U.S. Navy, though they give a different time for sunset and a different time for moonset, they also agree that the time span in between was 3 minutes. Now, can the moon be sighted exactly the minute or the second that the sun dips below the horizon? It's unlikely. It usually takes a little bit of darkness to set. But here, the margin of time is extremely, extremely narrow. Putting all of this together, let's take a look at the results. There are people all over the world that are concerned with the sighting of the moon on these dates, and people did go out and see. In front of you are the results of moonsighting.com. There are no sightings. Crescent Watch, another organization independent from moonsighting.com, they also reported no sightings. The Morocco Ministry of Islamic Affairs, which has their own independent moon sighting system, also reported no sighting, as is mentioned in this memo issued by them. The ICO project, which is also an astronomical organization which deals with and is concerned with the sighting of the moon, reports no sighting. The Crescent Committee, which is based out of Toronto and uses principles similar to ours, also reports no sighting. So all of these organizations that are concerned with the sighting of the moon and are working independently from Saudi Arabia are reporting no sighting. So when we put together the non-possibility in the region, as is concurred upon by several scientists, add that to insufficient time after moon birth, 8 hours and 37 minutes as opposed to the recommended time of 17 to 21 hours, even though it's not absolute, but most scientists will agree that 8 hours and 37 minutes is very, very insufficient. Add to that the fact that there were only 3 minutes from the exact sunset time to moonset on that day. Add to that that the only sighting that took place on that day was from the region one of the regions where it was declared not possible to see by many scientists. All of this results in our criteria being unfulfilled. We're not challenging the decision of Saudi Arabia to commence Dhul Hijjah on a specific date based on observations and testimonies that they received. But all we're saying is that the criteria we have set remains unfulfilled, and because the criteria was not fulfilled, we could not declare the next day, meaning the day after Wednesday, Thursday, to be the first of Dhul Hijjah. Instead, we decided to complete 30 days of Dhul Qa'dah and commence Dhul Hijjah from the Friday, which is September 26th. What conclusions are we forming? There are many questions that are arising in the minds of our brothers and sisters. The importance of following Saudi Arabia in matters of the moon is one of the important questions. There is no doubt that Saudi has an organized system of moon sighting, and the system they have is good, it's efficient, it's very suitable for the kingdom. It is not correct to say that Saudi makes wrong decisions or baseless or unfounded decisions. These are not things we can say about a country that has designated many resources and scholars and so on and so forth for the specific purpose of deciding decisions around the moon. So it wouldn't be fair to say that. However, the decisions made by Saudi are not binding on the rest of the world. This is something that has been agreed upon amongst scholars for centuries. In fact, as you will see, Saudi scholars themselves do not feel it is necessary to concur with them on matters of Ramadan and both Eids, including Eid-Ul-Adha. And the fact remains that there are many communities all around the world, countries, organizations, communities, basing their decisions, some of them on local sightings, others on Hilal committees that they have formed that have their own set of guidelines, others based on scientific calculations. All of this is going on around the world. The importance of fasting with Saudi on the day of Arafah. Bear in mind that for centuries, including during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Muslims around the world have been fasting the day of Arafah based on their own sighting systems. In fact, in Medina itself, the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims were fasting for 7 years before Hajj was an obligation. Even after the conquest of Mecca, Dhul Hijjah was never considered as something that had to be consulted with the people in Mecca and what sightings took place over there. Dhul Hijjah was never corroborated with Hajj in Mecca. It would be an error to say that Muslims from that generation all the way up till today, in every generation being hundreds of millions of Muslims, they all committed the major sin of fasting on Eid day and that they all missed their Arafat. That would not be correct. I mentioned Saudi scholars, one of them being Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, a prominent authority in that part of the world, who was asked by someone from the States, should we abide by the local sighting in determining Eid-Ul-Adha or should we follow the pilgrim schedule? Knowing that North America's sighting of Crescent may come a day before Saudi Arabia's sighting, the answer given by the Shaykh was that you should abide by the city you're living in. Another question to follow up with that first question is that this means we will fast on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah of North America and pray Eid on the 10th Dhul Hijjah of North America? He said yes, and that is what you should do without any haraj or mental anxiety. In 1986, over 100 scholars met in Jordan to discuss these issues, and they agreed that countries should observe Ramadan and Hajj based on their own sightings and that they are not obliged to follow the sightings or the decisions passed by Saudi. To conclude, we can say that the BCMA's decision, which was based on a policy that emerged after decades of conflict. This decision needs to be regarded and taken holistically. First of all, if the entire community and all the scholars in the community had been comfortable in following Saudi, there was no conflict, no divide, and there was absolutely no need to come up with a solution because there was no problem to find a solution for. So obviously there was an ongoing problem. It escalated at different points and a solution was sought. When we keep challenging the solution or keep ignoring the fact that there is a conflict, a difference of opinion has occurred and it needs to be reconciled, if we keep challenging the policy without acknowledging these things, it takes us right back to square one. Bearing in mind that unity requires some compromise. It requires understanding that there are a number of different positions on the issue. It requires understanding that some people have been appointed to make decisions on behalf of the community. People look up to the BCMA and organizations like the Sharia Council to make well-informed, correct decisions that are going to take care of people's deen and not affect their deen adversely. And these organizations in turn appoint certain officials to look after certain aspects and certain policies. So there has to be a level of trust and there has to be a level of compromise in the general public, in the general masses, that the decisions that are taking place are not taking place blindly. They're not taking place being ignorant of all of the facts. The policy itself, as well as the process that the decisions go through, are quite robust, quite strong. This particular decision was well-founded. It fulfilled the criteria laid out in the policy that was made for this purpose. Those who are affiliated with the BCMA do recognize that it is the premier organization in this province. It is representative of a very large body of Muslims. And those Muslims look up to BCMA for solutions. And we have a role to play in trying to bring people together to a common ground. We also need to acknowledge the fact that there are many organizations right across Canada and many mosques and organizations that are either following us or they have developed policies very similar to ours and are making their decisions in a similar manner. We express that we respect the other valid positions in this issue. We confirm that there are several approaches. We are upholding one particular approach that we feel is correct, and we feel it does offer many solutions to us. We do not ourselves have the attitude, or nor do we allow, I should say, an attitude that is disrespectful to any valid view in Sharia. For those community members who insist on fasting with Saudi on the day of Arafah, in this case Friday, you are entitled to your opinion. We respect that opinion. By all means, fast on Friday. But as far as celebrating Eid is concerned, our humble request to you is to celebrate Eid on Sunday with everyone else. In this way, you can fast on the day that you feel comfortable on. And you can have Eid with the Jama'ah, with the body of Muslims. This will neither affect your worship, it will not affect your udhiyah, because there is no harm. Even if Eid was decided, let's say for Saturday, and for some reason it was delayed till Sunday, that would be perfectly permissible. And the qurbani, the slaughtering, would be perfectly valid. So this is not going to affect your worship, but it will create a situation where people of both opinions can be united and have Eid on one and the same day. And with that, I close this presentation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to practice that which leads us to His pleasure. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite all of us and give us the understanding of deen. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.